Horizon Zero Dawn is due for release in 2016, although it's recently been rumoured to be delayed to 2017. What I want to know, though, is it going to be shit?
Well, we're both hoping it's not going to be, because we've got high hopes for this one.
We have indeed. Most people do. It's by Guerilla Games. That's Gorilla as in G-U-E, rather than Gorilla. Ooh. They're an Amsterdam-based development house, owned completely by Sony. So, hence why they tend to favour PlayStation exclusive stuff. Their first game was a bit of a shocker in two respects. First of all, because it was called Shell Shock, NAM 67, and secondly, because it was shit. It was originally released for the PC, PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2004. Scored 50% on Metacritic, 45% in terms of user average ratings. It's a third-person shooter. This is a quote from the country's longest-running PC gaming magazine. About as much fun to play as pulling a Viet Cong bayonet out of your gonads. It smells of something hot and strong, and it ain't napalm. But, really interestingly, in 2004... they also released Killzone. What a difference. This was for the PlayStation 2 exclusively, no PC version. It did slightly better on Metacritic, 70% in terms of critic averages, 74% in terms of user ratings. This is a first-person shooter. What really hurt Killzone was the fact that it was really marketed as a Halo beta, and it wasn't. This is a
Not
quote...
that it takes much to beat Halo, but...
It doesn't take much, but it still managed to somehow not. This is another quote from a review from a long-running but now defunct website. A lot better than the sack of shite that was Shell Shock. Killzone Liberation actually came out 2 years later, did better on the PSP than Killzone did on the PS2. 77% in terms of critic averages, 83% in terms of user ratings.
You always like it when user ratings are more, which has...
I tend to trust user ratings more than critic averages. Isometrically viewed third-person shooter, not a first-person shooter, unlike the mainline Killzone series. Quite well liked, as you can tell from the scores there. Killzone 2 came about 3 years later, 2009. This came out for the PlayStation 3, got 91% in terms of critic averages and 81% in terms of user rating. Notice the disparity.
Massive difference, which is also worrying, but I just remember when it came out, the hype for it, and then I played the demo and I was thinking, oh, I was a bit, underwhelmed.
Sony are really good at hyping Killzone games. The reason, interestingly, the reason the first Killzone is seen as a letdown is because it was hyped as a Halo beta. Killzone 2, a lot of the critics actually drank the Kool-Aid, to use an American expression, which is why it got 91%. But it was a good game. It was solid, not spectacular, massively overhyped, as I mentioned. The reviewers basically got caught on this wave of hype. As you can tell from the user ratings, they recognise it for the good but not spectacular game that it was. Graphically, it was really nice as well, actually, which is an important point that will carry over when we catch up with modern day. Killzone 3, this was out also for the PlayStation 4. 84% in terms of critic averages and 80% in terms of user ratings. Lots of small improvements over the second game that really, in my opinion, added up to the stronger game. It was fun, still not amazing, but even though the critic average is lower for Killzone 3, it is actually the better game. It's just that because there wasn't this tidal wave of hype that the reviewers lapped up. It tends to be remembered as the lesser game, unjustly, in my opinion.
It was definitely an enjoyable game, Killzone 3, I would say.
Killzone Shadowfall, or Shadow Fail, as it has since been dubbed, perhaps slightly unfairly, actually. 2013, this was the big PlayStation 4 launch title. This was the game that showcased what the PlayStation 4 was graphically capable of.
I mean, the graphics on it were just amazing.
I think there was some allegations of shenanigans with the screen resolution afterwards, but I must say, if that was true, then it worked, because when I was playing it, I literally thought, wow, and I'm a PC gamer, so I'm used to graphically nice games, but I thought, wow, this is, for a game console to be putting out graphics like this is amazing. The game itself, and this is why it's called Shadow Fail, again, it failed to live up to the hype. 73% critic average, 68% user average. It had a really inconsistent level of quality throughout the game. It veered from pretty good to pretty awful, and whilst that actually makes it sound a bit worse than it was mostly just pretty average, actually. I mean, it wasn't often really bad. I mean, that final level was atrociously designed. Whoever thought that was a great idea?
Needs a bullet between the eyes.
I was going to say needs the sack, but I guess that's another perspective.
I mean, I think graphically they were spot on, and that's what we need to do with Horizon Zero Dawn. Take the graphics of Shadow Fail
and make a game that lives up to that. Exactly. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to be including Killzone Mercenary in this roundup because this was actually by Guerilla Cambridge, which is a completely different development house. I say unfortunately because Killzone Mercenary was by far the best of the Killzone series, by a mile, although that had a slightly dubious final level as well, actually. Now, that brings us to Horizon Zero Dawn, which is still actually down for 2016 release, although it's been heavily rumoured to be slipping. I guess we'll find out more at E3. Now, this basically stars a protagonist called Aloy, who is not a piece of metal, but a woman.
I actually read somewhere that she was meant to be a cross between Yeti from Game of Thrones. Can't remember the other one, but she was meant to be a cross between two gingers.
Two gingers?
Yeah, that's where they got my inspiration for her from.
Who's Yeti in Game of Thrones?
Oh, you know, what's her face?
Jon Snow's...
Yeah, Jon Snow's...
bit on the side?
Yeah, Jon Snow's...
The one who looks like Bianca Jackson from EastEnders.
Mm.
Now, as you can probably tell from the gameplay, it uses a modified version of the Shadowfell engine. And that really comes across. It's a beautiful looking game. It's really... They've tweaked the colour palette, obviously. It's a much more... a lot of games that are upcoming seem to have really nailed what it is gamers want from a colour palette. We seem to be moving away from sort of the drab greys and browns and the Gears of War style mutedness. And we seem to be getting these really nice blue turquoisey skies and lush green vegetation and so forth, and that all really comes out when you watch footage of the game.
And in the gameplay, like the actual surroundings, like for bushes and stuff, reminds me of some Assassin's Creeds and Shadow of Mordor, where you're in the bush and that's your cover and you can't be seen.
It's set in a primitive world, but it's clearly going to be an Earth-like world, but in the future. There's remnants of an ancient but technologically advanced civilization. Something that occurred to me when I first saw footage of this game, and has actually been really borne out in terms of the settings, is how both visually and conceptually similar it is to Enslaved's Journey to the West.
Yeah, which was an underrated game.
Really underrated game.
I hadn't heard of it, and in the PlayStation Now beta you told me to try it out, and I was not disappointed at all.
Yeah, really, really fantastic, atmospheric. That's the thing with Enslaved, it was the atmosphere that gets you. And if Guerrilla can sort of bottle that in this, obviously the style of game is different. Yes, they're both third-person action games, but Enslaved was a linear, story-based action game where you go from A to B, whereas this is actually set in an open world. You can see these kind of robotic, semi-robotic dinosaurs running around. Again, that's quite similar to Enslaved. There were these denizens of the planet. It's this overgrown Earth, and the denizens were these mechs, basically. There were very few organic life forms left. And from what we've seen so far of Horizon Zero Dawn, it looks like it's going to be a pretty similar situation for that.
It looks like a lot of it as well. You'll be harvesting energy fuels from these robots, and you'll be doing a lot of upgrades to your bow and arrow through it and other weapons, presumably.
Yeah, there's going to be a heavy emphasis on exploration there, and that's going to include collecting, gathering resources and so forth, obviously getting into combat situations with the robot dinosaurs, and then, as you say, harvesting their energy cores and so forth, so that you can upgrade your character and move through the game. The objective is to sort of explore the mysterious past of this world. There are going to be RPG elements. The developers have described this as being somewhere between the RPG elements of Assassin's Creed and Elder Scrolls Skyrim, which are quite different, actually, because the RPG mechanics in Assassin's Creed are very, very light.
I would actually argue that somewhere between Assassin's Creed and Elder Scrolls Skyrim would be for Witcher 3, because I think it did a spot-on job, especially for newcomers to the RPG scene.
I think The Witcher 3 is probably a lot closer to Skyrim. I personally look at something like Horizon Zero Dawn. I look at it as perhaps being slightly more towards the Assassin's Creed style of RPG. There's obviously a heavy focus on action. They've described it as a third-person action game. I think the RPG elements will probably be not a million miles away from something like Tomb Raider, the new Tomb Raider, that is, where you have tech trees and you're gathering resources and so forth.
I'd definitely be happier with that than it being too hardcore, and that's what I was trying to get with The Witcher 3. I think it did a good job of not being too hardcore in some respects.
So let's have a look at the evidence. It's running on a fantastic engine. It's evocative of a brilliant game, that being Enslaved. I've never actually seen them admit that they've been inspired by Enslaved. I'd be really surprised if they haven't been. Their history has been mostly good. If we push Shell Shock to the back of the pole, which is where it deserves to be, Guerrilla Games do have an actually fairly solid background, if unspectacular. I think actually moving to a different genre, going back to third-person action, giving it an open world, just basically moving away from Killzone, I think this actually could be the game that is Guerrilla's true breakout hit.
I'm not sure about you. My biggest worry about this game is the combat, and if it's going to be a bit too slow paced with the bow and arrow, and how they pull it off almost.
I have a similar concern. I worry about variety, actually, because what we've seen, admittedly we haven't seen much from the game, so it's difficult to fully assess it, but I worry that because the combat situations between you and the dinosaurs look quite involved, and they actually look fairly similar to one another, and I worry that, like in Shadow of Mordor, when you take down one of those large creatures in Shadow of Mordor, you think, okay, I've done that now and I don't really want to do it again. If there's a game that's predicated on doing that, not solely predicated on doing that, but involves doing that quite a lot, I do worry that I might get a bit tired of just doing that over and over. But that's obviously a really speculative worry. We haven't seen enough of the game to fully gauge what it's going to be about. So, all of those things considered, what are the chances that it will be shit?
I think a good 30%. I think that's quite a generous...
30% I think is fair enough, yeah. I mean, we have to take into account the fact that they've never actually made an absolutely spectacular game. But, of course, there's a lot of things in its favour. Just, it looks great. It's one of those games that captures the imagination like No Man's Sky. And if it has an ounce of what made Enslaved brilliant, then I think we're in for a treat. I'm just going to be really upset if it's true that it really has been delayed until 2017.
I know, it'd be a really nice Christmas release.
It would be. Okay, thanks ever so much for watching. Do tell us if you agree or disagree, or tell us that we're dicks and we're totally wrong in the comments below. Lots more Will It Be Shit on youtube.com/ParallaxLive. Thanks ever so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next stream.